Thanks everybody for making the time. We're going to continue today to kind of talk about the automated user lifecycle management. In the last session, last couple of sessions, we've gone through the process of setting up connectors. We looked at the whole joiner process in terms of the business rules, the access control model. There were a couple of things that we hadn't covered yet, so we're going to complete them today. And in particular, I want to talk about when we are onboarding users. There's some details that we need to worry about in terms of things like notifications, like sending out email notifications to the supervisor to let them know what the temporary credentials might be for a person joining, because the that person doesn't have email access yet, right? And we don't want to distribute corporate credentials to private emails. There are things like where we want to place, especially if we're integrating with Active Directory, where we want to place what OU we want to place the users in. So we'll talk about a few of these things. We'll then talk about terminations, transfers, and then we'll talk a little bit about scheduled tasks that we can define, and we'll use a few examples. Really, like for example, how we can deal with, say, like inactive users. So when we had looked at the scripting section, we had talked about how you can get a reference or a context to the RabbitMQ infrastructure, and to be able to send out a custom message from there. Right. What we didn't really talk about was the things which were really built into the framework already. So a common task that we have is when you're onboarding people is you want to, you know, um, often let the manager know that this person is going to be coming in. Here are the temporary credentials, so that they can log in, to the account that's been created for them. Or you may also want to let the end user know. There's some use cases where it might be okay, right? So in that in the transformation scripts, remember, like if you there are a couple of parameters which are passed in into that framework. One was a row object, and one was the provision user. So on the provision user, there are a couple of flags that you can set. So one of them is to set email credentials to the supervisor, and the other one is you can set the email credentials to the new user. And you can either set them as true or false. True means you're going to send them a notification, and false means you're not going to send them, right? So if, in that execute body of that transformation script, you add these two lines in there, you will trigger off an email notification. And the email notification, they're basically templates with OpenIAM. And one of them is called new user email supervisor, and the other one is just new user email, right? And we'll take a look at these in a second when we go into the practical part of this. And you can basically edit those templates to kind of suit your needs. You can send out the templates right now. They're written in Groovy script, so you can do anything that scripting allows. In an upcoming release later this year, there'll be a nicer mail template editor, which doesn't really have as much of a Groovy script flair to it. But it's not very hard to use. And again, we'll take a look at how it works. But you can customize those emails and how you want to send them out. They can be in text-based, or they can be rich text, and you can have some control over that. Right? And again, the template editor is inside the web console under the administrator menu option. The next one that we run into is typically a case when we're integrating with an LDAP or an Active Directory. Part of creating those new users, and even as part of the transfer process, or in terminations, we may need to control where we want to place that user, and what OU do we want to place them. And a couple of different ways that we can do this. So one is that if you already have an org structure, you can import that org structure into OpenIAM. And so if you use the organization the organization object, you can create a new type of organization called org unit, and you could model the whole hierarchy there. And in that hierarchy, you can also have the actual path that that an object would have within your Active Directory or your LDAP. Right? Um, once you have your structure, you can then do it one of two ways. One is you can use the business rules. So you can use the business rules to say, well, if I'm under, while I'm giving those birthright access, parameters, you can also define what OU that person is going to be in. And so all you need to do is select the option to add a user to an organization, and then you can pick the org unit that you want to put them in, right? And then in your script, you can read what the organization membership is, and you can send it out that way, right? And so kind of showing what a sample script will look like in terms of, the organizations and being able to look up the values and how you would set it. If you wanted to calculate this entirely in GroovyScript, you can. Again, my question from last time was, you know, unless there's a reason that you want to do this in Groovy, I would recommend keeping it in the business rules. It's much easier to be able to maintain when it doesn't require any lower level technical skills, right? So this way you can write a generic script like this, a few lines of code that will read that object, take the values and set it, um, and you can change the business rules as needed, going forward, right? Oh, sorry. Okay, so the next couple of things, these are not um, really such that critical, but I wanted to address this because the example of the transformation script that I originally provided, and even the one that we uploaded to the community, had a lot of debug information that was really written as basically a bunch of print statements or print lines. And it's really a quick and sloppy way of doing it. And I probably shouldn't have shared an example which kind of encouraged such a loose way of doing things, right? So the preferred way is that you should use the logging framework, which is integrated into OpenIAM and into the Groovy scripts, and log any debug information you want. And the idea is that by using the logging framework, you have a lot more control over being able to turn those things on and off, right? So, for example, in the log statements, you can say whether this is informational, whether this is debug, it's a warning, or it's an error message, right? For example, like if you're going to log if you get an exception in your Groovy script and you want to log that, right? And you could put that as, log.error, and you can, capture that. Or if you have, debug or trace information, you could put it as info or debug, and that will log. And the good part is you can turn that off, right? So like logging, it does have a performance impact, especially if you have a lot of users in your system and you have the stuff just being generated out. It's going to slow the system down, and it's also going to take up disk space, right? So one of the things that basically the logging framework allows us to do is that it allows us to turn off things when we don't need them. So if you are only doing error level logging, you're not going to see your debug and your info and your warning, But if you have, say, like warning level, it'd be warning an error that you're going to see. On the other hand, if you turn on debug, it will be debugging everything down below, right? So you will see, but so you have control over what you can expose depending on the kind of problem that you're trying to go after. The other part is when you use a logging framework, there's some other details that you get in there, right? Like you get the timestamps, you get the class names, the log levels. You can turn on log rotation as well. So it gives you a little bit more control over the whole process. So this is one of the cases, do as I say and not as I did, right? So don't follow my example, follow the example that I'm showing here. And we will, publish a better script, which kind of shows you how to do it the right way. There's a question here that says, "What is the meaning of Groovy here?" Um, Not really sure what you mean by that. Groovy is a scripting language. It's basically Java and a scripting language. We've been using it now for the last 3 sessions. So um, if you're really not sure about that, send us a note separately, or you may just want to try Googling, type in the word Groovy script and see what you get there. Okay. Okay. The next thing was so the last the slide was about debug information. This one's really about audit and information. So audit logs are stored inside Elasticsearch, um, and obviously the out of the box capabilities that we have, right? All the join remove reliever stuff, everything that you do, like when you authenticate, when you log in, you log out, you save your managed system configurations, you change your role. All of those things are logged in the audit log, so that you have traceability of who did what when, and it's for compliance, it's for traceability, and it's kept in a central place. Um, in your Groovy scripts, if you have things that you're doing which you feel should be added into Elasticsearch, into the audit logs, then you can basically add 2 lines of code to expose or to be able to get the context to that, right? One is the import statement for the audit log builder, and the other one is to get the instance of it. And once you have that, then you can just say add info, or one of the other levels that we have, and then you could log whatever message you want. And then this will show up in your Elasticsearch. It'll also show up in a log viewer that you have. So if you want things that you can see through the log viewer and not have to look at the low level logs, then put it in the audit logs. Now, that being said, don't use the audit logs for, doing the low level trace and debug information. You're going to create load on the system, which you really don't want. And especially if you have tens of thousands of people on there, just be careful about using the right thing for the right reasons. Okay, so that covers some of the things that I want to talk about in terms of how we want to be able to handle, like, at least complete the open tasks that we had, but the joiner process. So the question is that log associated with a specific action, or how do we find them? Good question. I think I'll have to take a look at what the signature is, but there should be some other additional parameters that we can probably add in here so that we have the same level of control that we do, in the OpenIAM logs itself, so we can organize them by event and structure. It's a good question. Let me see if I can find a better example for you. Um, and also we can build out what other operations are. So this is an info. I'm pretty sure that there's other methods on this object that we can use to control this. Okay, so talking about transfers. So transfers are basically, or you can call them movers. This is when you're moving within the corporation, right? So you have already been hired, and now you're going to go, your job title changes, your department changes, your supervisor can change. Any one of those kind of attributes changing normally would trigger a transfer. So, and when you have a transfer, there's a few things that you normally want to do. One is you want to be able to recalculate your birthright access. So that automatic access that you got from the business rules, you want to be able to recalculate it to take away the things which are no longer needed and to be able to grant things that you do need, right? You may optionally, depending on how your system's set up, um, also want to trigger a on-demand access review, right? So usually the message would be something like restart a workflow, and a notification would go to the person's new manager, and that new manager would basically review the access, and anything that they don't need, they would revoke it, right? And this way, it prevents people from accumulating access when they're going from position to position over time, and we don't have to wait for user access reviews to be able to clean up things that they need. This is a second reason for this, which is not really the primary use case, but it's some of our customers that we have. They do this review to make sure that licenses which are owned by one department um, are released and come back to that department as opposed to going to the next one. So let's say you have a certain application that you're using, you have, say 50, licenses for it. When a person moves, you free it up so that the next person you bring on in your department can have access to that license and you don't lose that, right? So it can be useful in different ways, but obviously the primary reason is to be able to control the level of access, right? And so there is an option. So to be able to turn this on, it's pretty easy. There is, and again, we'll take a look at this as we go forward. In the web console under administration, there's a system configuration. There's a checkbox that says initiate access requests, for selected roles and groups, right? For new hires and edit user. Um, you check that off, it will trigger off the workflow, and it will basically force this level of this type of access review. Um, if you if you want to control the flow of the workflow, so we haven't really talked about this yet, but there is a workflow engine that's embedded inside OpenIAM. I believe it's Activity is the workflow engine. It's an open source workflow engine. And so we have a collection of these workflow templates which are there. They're there for new hires, requesting access, adding, removing roles, groups, and there's also one there for position change. And in there, you can define the approval steps. All of the workflows which are there in OpenIAM out of the box are all multi-approvers, so that you can add as many approval steps as you want. All of them also support SLAs and escalations. Okay? So there's a question that says, if user access shall remain for movers, will it retrigger, remove, or grant access, or leave it as it is, same for provisioning? So if let's say you have a mover and you have maybe 5 entitlements which are overlapping, and then there's 5 which are different, right? So what will happen is that those 5 which are overlapping, which means that they're the same, they will be untouched. But the ones which are not needed for this new job, they will be automatically removed. The birthright access rules will take them away, right? And any new access that's needed, again, if it's coming from the business rule, it will be automatically granted and it will trigger off a downstream provisioning to add those groups. But what we already have will not be touched, right? So it will stay as it is. And I think we want to do that because just tampering with access that you already have, it just creates another scenario for something to go wrong. So the next one, and I'm covering the conceptual things first, and then we're going to go through the practical part. We're going to talk about terminations or levers. And there's there's a bunch of permutations around this, which makes this, a little bit more involved than what it seems like on the surface. So the most obvious case of a termination is person resigns or has been terminated and they're leaving on a certain date, right? And I'm going to classify that as an automated termination. And then we have terminations, by an admin where it could be more of an emergency termination where, you have a rogue employee, you want to kick them out, right? And then there's some in-between cases, like there's like leaves of absence, and depending on how long that leave is, you may want to suspend that user or take away their access. Again, it depends on the corporate policy of how you want to do things. But these are things that we need to factor in, right? So when you're implementing your termination functionality, obviously you should know what your corporation's requirements are. But some common things that come up, right? You should know whether a termination translates into a disabled user, or are we going to delete them? And if we disable first, did they stay disabled? Or sometimes companies have a period where they disable and then they do a cleanup after, say, 30, 60, 90 days, right? So that you have some kind of forensics period. You can review things and then you can remove them afterwards. Then the next part is about entitlements. Like, do we remove them? Do we end date them? You know, leave them as it is because you kill the account, so they don't really have any impact anyway. And sometimes it's like it's the end system that's dictating this. So, like for example, if you're using Oracle EBS and you have a certain number of, I think they're called responsibilities, right? That you're entitled to. In an Oracle EBS, you don't remove those; you end date them, right? So that option isn't really up to us. The end system is telling us that. But what happens in others could be under our control. And then the other part is, what do we do in OpenIAM? Do we keep a record of it, or do we purge it there? Now, there's a record of it in the audit logs anyway, so you can always go back and see what happened there. But sometimes companies just want to disable and change the status of the OpenIAM object to terminate it and set the end date, and then that's again, it's all supported and it's okay. Um, Other things to consider is sometimes, and it's not a far-fetched case, it's very often that access that people have, all of it was not through to basically systems that we have connectors for. So they could be, various things, and or even manual things like you need to get your laptop back or your badging, right? So as part of this, we may need to open up a ticket in a ticketing system to say, well, this person's leaving on this date, make sure that you revoke that access, right? So you have those kind of factors to kind of consider. There's a question is, if a user goes on leave of absence, can entitlements be removed for a specific amount of time and then added back in on a predetermined case? Yes, you can do that. My question is, are you going to only do that with the entitlements, or are you going to change the status of the account as well? Right. So do you want to disable the account first? I would say that you probably want to, again, and it could be some companies want to allow you to work from home if you really need that emergency access, right? So it's possible. I mean, you do have control over being able to do these things. It may not be a out of the box, thing that you can just turn on and check off and say it runs, but you can use like the scheduled tasks to be able to implement these capabilities that you're asking about. It's not very hard. Okay. Yeah, so this next one is really just kind of talking about things that you need to do to actually implement it, right? So when we talk about terminations, and the example I'm picking here is um, that we want to change the status in OpenM for the user to be terminated, and then we want to move them to an OU which says disabled OU, right? And this is a pretty common task. So the few things that we need to do. One is in the transformation script that we created, right? We had a section for worker status. So simply that switch statement that we had that says if the status is terminated, then I'm going to assign the enum in a constant, right, of terminated to the status value, and that will trigger off the appropriate behavior by default. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the policy map. Right, and so here, again, different ways that we did it. We kind of, again, took a shortcut, hard-coded a couple of default paths here for the OU to where, you can disable them. But in that policy map, again, if you're talking about Active Directory, the attribute would be for the path. You would take the script associated with it, and you would basically, add logic in it that says if the status is terminated, then move this guy over to the disabled OU, and the disabled OU is defining the path up here, right? So it's, again, not very hard, but just things to keep in mind as you're kind of doing this so that you have the full flow in place. The last thing, and don't worry about being able to read that script, it's just there as an example so that we have it in here. We have these scheduled tasks, batch tasks, whatever you want to call them, right? And basically, all it is that is you can define a cron expression or how often a task is supposed to run. Could be every 15 minutes, could be once a day, once a week, whatever it is that makes sense. And then there is a Groovy script that you can invoke. And basically the framework will call that script. Unlike the other scripts, which have a well-defined interface, the batch tasks do not. They don't assume any parameters are being passed in. You just basically need to, have that one line at the top, which is going to get the application context, and then you can do whatever you want, and you need to have that output statement at the end to set the right exit code, right? And what you do in between is up to you. But this way you can do, all of those things, right? So, for example, we have, people who are inactive, right? We can run a process once a day that says, okay, everybody who's been inactive for 90 days, well, maybe at 75 days, we're going to send them a reminder that you haven't done anything with this account in so long. And at 90 days, we're going to basically turn it off, right? So we're going to change the status to be disabled, and they will lose their access, right? So you can use the batch task for that. And they're out of the box tasks for this. You can also, future hires, right? So somebody is going to come in 2 weeks from now. Well, we may have created the account in OpenIAM early on, and we may have even created an AD, but maybe you left it in a disabled state. Well, like the night before the person comes in, we may want to activate those accounts, right? Obviously, another way of doing it is to wait till the night before. But again, a lot of times corporations have things that they need to get done before before that actual date, right? So waiting till that very end is not really good enough, right? So this question is will it be possible to stop or terminate tasks that are already running? Maybe they're stuck in an infinite loop. So unfortunately, in this current version, no, you cannot stop an existing task. And yeah, if you wrote code that's going to throw the system into an infinite loop, then you're probably going to have to take other steps to be able to stop it. There will probably be capability later on this year based on the roadmap to have better control over processes which are running and to be able to interrupt them. So it's there, but it's not there right now, right? So and I think that yeah, okay. All right, let's shift over to more of a practical demo. There's a bunch of things that I want to go over, and let's start with that. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to log into the web console, and we'll start with that. So the first thing that we had, again going on the same sequence that we had on our slides, we talked about the mail templates. So if you come to administration and you go to mail template editor, and you can pull up various names. So let's say, for example, we take this user email supervisor. So, we have this, out of the box email that says, user account created for so-and-so, and here's the URL. Obviously this URL, this isn't my demo environment, but you would have something, in yours. This may almost certainly not be sufficient for the message that you want to send out, right? So you can, type in whatever it is that you want, and change that message. Now, in here, you'll see that there's a placeholders, like there's a user.first name, user last name, some username. There are some parameters that you can add to it. If you, Question is, will it be possible to create new templates from the console? In 4.2.2, yes, it will be. I know that's been kind of a pain in the butt, for a while, that the UI only lets you edit the templates which are here. There's a back-end way to kind of go create new templates, but it's been a limitation for a while, and it is being addressed. But it's a good question. Thank you. So down below, you say mail template property. These are the various parameters which you can introduce. So for example, if you wanted to add the password in this email that you want to send out as credentials, right? So you can just put that in here, and you could say, well, add another line in here that says, right? Again, I'm not saying that you should send out your username and password in the same email. We all know that's not a good practice, but again, the point is that this is kind of how there's some predefined common things that you can send out. Also, you'll see there's a checkbox here. Is this an HTML email or not, right? So you can turn this on and off based on how you want to do things, right? And there's an email customization script. I think this is more of a hook to, um, to add other capabilities in it. I'm not sure. I don't think I have a great example around this, but I'll see if I can find one, and kind of post it to the community when we get the session up there. Okay. So the next one. So we talked about transfers and terminations. So let's go ahead and create a couple of new users like we did before. So we're going to go to synchronization, and I'm going to go to my demo task, and I'm going to upload a new file. Right. So okay. So I'm going to preview it, make sure that I have the right file, and I don't think I do. So 1 second. And I just see it's a different file. Okay, that's something's. All right, I know what the problem is. Bear with you 1 second. Okay, that should have fixed it. Let's try it again. Okay, so we have a couple of users in here that we can use, right? So let's go ahead and do a sync now. And this is the same format that we used earlier. It's going to create a couple of records. We can, review them. So for example, here, all right, now they should be ready. For some reason that first sync didn't go through. So this was the user that we created, and we see that it's active, and it's got a senior support engineer title, and so on and so forth, right? And then we have a bunch of entitlements that we created, and we see that they were all granted just now, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the status on one of these. Actually, let's bring up the second one so you can see um, the second user that we created, right? And it's got a contractor. And so let's take the contractor and we're going to change the status from active to terminated. And then the first person, we're going to, instead of having them as a senior support engineer, we're going to make them a junior support engineer. And then if we come in here again and we go to synchronization, we run the same process again. So in this case, we are changing the status on one and we're changing the title on the other. So again, if I do a preview, you'll see that the worker status has been changed to terminated and the user title here, the first one, has been made to junior support engineer, right? So now if I do a sync now, in a minute or so, I should see some email notifications coming to me that will tell me that that the user has been updated. Yep. So again, if we pull out that user, let's take the last one. We'll see that the status has been terminated. And if you look at the user entitlements, you'll see that they've been end dated so that, again, this is a few minutes later of when the termination took place, right? So you have a record, at least, so in OpenIAM, we're keeping a copy of it, and downstream, we may probably blow it away, right? And that's perfectly okay. And this allows us to restore the access if we need to. So if we had blown it away from here, then we would not have been able to do that. And then for the other user, we will see that they're still active, but their job title changed, and the entitlements probably changed. I'm not sure, I don't remember which ones, what this role grants them, but if you look at the log viewer, you'll see that under synchronization, again, there's two threads going, and you'll see a bunch of activity through here, and you'll see that the position change workflow was started. Okay? And then in the other record, you'll see that various things go on, and we initiated a termination workflow. Now, some customers have, they don't have a lot of faith in their authoritative source, which is kind of a contradiction by itself, because that's the whole purpose of the authoritative source. But in those cases, they feel like there are mistakes which can be initiated from HR, and it can have adverse effects downstream. So what they want to do is they want approval. So they, even on a termination, they want to initiate a workflow to basically get that termination in place before these things happen, right? So this is kind of how this example is basically flowing. So now if I log out of here and I go back into the hiring manager, I picked the wrong option. So bear with me 1 second. So in my inbox over here, I will see this, there's a revoke workflow, and then there's a termination, position change. So if I open up the position change, you'll see that the manager has all the access that this person has. and they can take action at this point. So I can say, well, I want my E3 license back, and they don't need this one either, right? And then so I can approve with this partial rejection, right? And then it will go to the security manager. Now, it didn't have to be a multi-step approval flow. It could have been a single person, the manager, doing this, and kind of go from there, right? So last thing I want to show you is I want to log back in as a sysadmin and just take a look at, and we'll go over the workflows in much more detail in the next session. But so if you go to access control and resource, you'll find a collection of resources in the system. And if you filter by activity, you will see all of the different various workflow templates that we have. And if you filter by position change, you will see the position change workflow definition. And the part that you care about is the approver associations. And this is where we define the approval steps, right? So for example, if we don't think the security manager is needed for a position change, we can blow that away. And then we can simply add another step, and we can say, well, it's, who knows, maybe it's somebody in a certain group that you want to use, right? Again, so you can define these, and we'll go over the workflows in great detail in the next session. But in this way, you can define the approval steps that this workflow needs to do. Okay? So this is it. These are the questions. This is kind of the scope of what we had planned for our session today. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we'll see you on Thursday.